USIP, 19th of October 2023, 3 pointers regarding tensions between China and India. China and the Indian subcontinent are at full-scale war. Over the past 10 years, ties between the two powerful Asian nations have deteriorated, especially after an altercation between Indian and Chinese troops in the Galwan Valley in 2020. Neither Beijing nor New Delhi wants to see an escalation toward a more serious conflict, despite legitimate concerns that these nuclear powers' ties are moving in the wrong direction due to their continued provocative acts. As the rivalry between the United States and China heats up, the United States has worked to strengthen its security and economic ties with India because it views India as a key ally in Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. However, in the face of growing rivalry from big powers and the emergence of a multipolar world, New Delhi continues to adhere to its policy of non-alignment, so don't expect India to follow American leadership. The perspectives of both parties on the deteriorating relations, as well as the implications for the United States, are discussed by USIP's Andrew Scoble and Daniel Markey. What are Beijing's and New Delhi's perspectives on the escalation of hostilities? Scoble, as it plays a long game to promote its interests and strengthen its navy to dominate the Indian Ocean, China currently aims to maintain a cordial working relationship with India, putting aside sensitive matters like the unsolved boundary conflict. Beijing wants to keep New Delhi tightly sealed inside a geostrategic South Asian box for the foreseeable future while China conducts regular diplomatic and commercial relations with India. Chinese officials view India as an oversized middle power with aspirations to be a great power. However, Beijing now regards New Delhi more gravely as a danger to the country's security and a barrier to China assuming its rightful position as the leading Asian nation on the continent's landmass and coastline. As a result, China has, among other things, strengthened its long-standing all-weather relationship with India and continued to support Pakistan, India's rival in South Asia. There are significant and long-lasting military and economic aspects to this Beijing-Islamabad continental axis. China believes India, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is determined to cause unrest along their shared Himalayan border and work with other nations to thwart China's ascent and counter its expanding influence in the Indian Ocean region. Furthermore, Beijing is still processing the psychological fallout from India, surpassing China as the most populous state in the world in the middle of 2023, even as it has taken note of New Delhi's growing economy and growing military prowess. China is also aware of India's growing security cooperation with the US and its participation in the revived quadrilateral security dialogue, often known as the Quad, with the US, Australia, and Japan. Though China and India are founding members of the BRICS group, Beijing lied and invited New Delhi and Islamabad into the China-dominated Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO) in 2017. However, India is notable for being the most significant developing nation to choose not to participate in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which was widely publicized when it was introduced in 2013. Markey, over the previous 10 years, India's relations with China have endured several setbacks interspersed with the fatal border conflicts of 2020. The two parties have maintained their abnormal state of relationship ever since. When Prime Minister Modi assumed office 10 years ago, Indian authorities could not predict this course of events. Subsequently, eminent Indian specialists and seasoned politicians predicted that India and all other global powers, including China, would have balanced relations. Modi and his group believed that China was a crucial economic ally for the advancement of India. Even now, the Modi administration seems to have maintained hope for a return to more normal relations with China throughout the past year, demonstrating the strength of that Indian impetus. It was the belief of Indian diplomats that military-led negotiations with their Chinese counterparts over the disputed border would result in sufficient advancements to allow for the restart of summit-level diplomacy with China in 2023. That year was expected to be highly visible, as Modi was scheduled to host the G20, the BRICS summit in South Africa, and the SCO. But Indian hopes were not fulfilled in considerable measure. At the last minute, New Delhi reduced the SCO to a virtual summit. Modi and Xi met briefly and seemed to have little business together in Johannesburg, and Xi chose to forego India entirely by skipping the G20. What does the relationship's immediate future look like? Markey, the diplomatic impasse between China and India from 2023 may continue until 2024. Modi has good reasons to maintain his harsh stance toward Beijing. Politically, leaders of India's opposition parties have already attacked Modi's handling of relations with China before the country's impending election campaign. Modi cannot afford to appear weak in front of the Indian electorate after positioning himself as a fervent nationalist. From a strategic standpoint as well, Indian authorities have to be afraid that even the appearance of making concessions to China might just as easily lead to further coercion as to stability. This does not imply that India enjoys its current rivalry with Beijing. Simply put, New Delhi believes that Beijing has the upper hand because China has forced India to respond to its military provocations along the line of actual control as well as to a variety of other Chinese military, political, and economic incursions into India's historical sphere of influence in South Asia and the Indian Ocean. For now, New Delhi's only options, given the power disparity that benefits China, are to increase its border defense spending and forge stronger relationships with other nations with a similar goal to thwart Chinese aggression, most notably the United States. However, even India's defensive actions risk escalating a long-standing security conflict with China and igniting a more expensive and high-stakes contest. The outcome of the most recent 20th round of military negotiations may be one encouraging development in this otherwise dire situation. According to reports, the two sides decided to discuss options for mutual decreases in border personnel levels throughout the spring and summer and to refrain from provocative activities during the bitterly harsh Himalayan winter. Scobell, as China attempts to manage its frequently tense and occasionally explosive relationship with India, the mistrust and suspicion clouded Beijing-New Delhi relations for 60 years, ever since the 1962 border war, have endured and been strengthened by more recent violent border skirmishes. In contrast to previous decades, when Sino-Indian tensions and the hostile environment were mainly restricted to their isolated, landlocked borders, the conflict now extends to the maritime domain, including the Indian Ocean and beyond. Furthermore, China and India compete with one another for status and power on the international scene, particularly for control of the Global South. This indicates that a significant improvement in bilateral relations will unlikely occur anytime soon. What does this signal for both the US-India relationship and the US-China rivalry? And how ought Washington to reply? Scobell, to reassure India and discourage China, Washington should seek to deepen its alliance with New Delhi. The strong non-alignment tradition of New Delhi places restrictions on how much stronger US-Indian security ties can get. However, there is still an opportunity to improve strategic cooperation in ways that benefit each democracy's national security as well as the stability of the Indo-Pacific area. In the interim, Washington can communicate to Beijing the objectives and interests of the United States concerning New Delhi. Even if Chinese officials might not take such signals at face value, the U.S. runs the risk of Beijing making its unquestioned assumptions about U.S. intentions in the absence of clear goals and priorities. There has never been a greater need for the United States and China to communicate clearly and continuously. This holds for South Asia, a more constrained region, and the larger framework of the US-China global strategic competition. Markey, it is evident that the Biden administration views deeper relations with India as a crucial component of its Indo-Pacific geopolitical rivalry strategy with China. More than anything else, however, New Delhi's acceptance of Washington's offer of strategic cooperation has been prompted by India's perception of its vulnerability to Chinese aggression. The present generation of leaders in New Delhi sees relatively little attraction in the American liberal democratic ideology, American global leadership, or Western values. Instead, they would favor a multipolar world system, allowing India to safely avoid the geopolitical rivalry between the US and China while forging its path to global leadership. Policymakers in the United States should know India's unique viewpoint on China's rivalry. China is viewed as a strategic issue by the US and India, but their perspectives are based on differing national interests and ideologies. The leaders of India are aware of the dangers posed by a lingering border dispute with China. Still, they are nevertheless uneasy about how this uncertainty is making India more reliant on Washington. These revelations ought to dispel the myth among American policymakers that India is anxious to join an alliance against China and temper Washington's aspirations of an alliance-style relationship with New Delhi.